Hello, everyone, and welcome to Middle East Macromedia with me, Umair Jamal. In today's episode, we examine Washington's strategic calculation toward Afghanistan, the evolving regional security dynamics, and the shifting landscape of counterterrorism in Afghanistan. Joining us to unpack these developments is Ambassador Ashraf Haidari. He has served as Afghanistan ambassador to Sri Lanka and deputy chief of mission at the Afghan embassies in New Delhi and Washington, D.C. He's also the founder and president of Displaced International and teaches at various universities, including Arizona State University. Ambassador, welcome to the session, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ambassador, let's start with the sort of big picture. The United States has withheld formal recognition of the Taliban-led, government, as many other countries have done. Yet Washington maintains active working contact on many issues, including humanitarian aid, hostage issues, counterterrorism, and other technical matters. What are the sort of primary US strategic goals in Afghanistan today? And have they sort of shifted since the Taliban arrival and where we are now?
Absolutely. And the shift happened under the Democratic administration led by President Biden, of course, initially initiated by President Trump and carried on and forward by President Biden to withdraw from Afghanistan from what it was a US-led liberal state building, one driven by not only just strategic interests, as you pointed out, but also by shared values of democracy, human rights, of course, protection of women's rights, and the need to help connect Afghanistan regionally and globally so that the country would never again slide back into the same situation which allowed the Taliban and global terrorist networks to mastermind and carry out the tragedy of 9/11 in September 2001. So that was the purpose, but unfortunately, the US ran out of patience, strategic patience to really see this, what was a growing young democracy, stand on its own. And so the country prematurely withdrew from Afghanistan, and with that, the rest of NATO did, effectively allowing the Taliban to recapture Afghanistan with the support of an active support of Pakistan, which used to shelter, arm, and essentially operate an insurgency, or I would say, to be specific, a terror campaign out of Pakistan across Afghanistan for 2021 for years, which in a way, unfortunately, tired down the international community, and especially the US and NATO, and that resulted in the premature withdrawal, despite the fact that Afghan people had numerous transformational gains in every sector, from economy to socioeconomic indicators to such as millions of girls back to school, hundreds of thousands of women back to university and graduating, women in the Afghan parliament, women across the Afghan government, diplomatic missions. It was a country very much, on the verge of takeoff, but with continued international support.
Ambassador, you touched on something, Pakistan's active support for the regime which is now in power. You know, they were housed in Pakistan some time ago. Now they're in power. Pakistan wanted them in power. Now they don't want to see each other. I'm sure you are following. There's this attack in Pakistan, Pakistan attacks in Afghanistan, and things are just out of control. What do you think went wrong between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban?
Well, the Pakistani military and intelligence establishment continues to support the Taliban, strategically speaking. But the steps taken by them are more tactical, and that's to respond to certain threats or to strike targets of choice that do not necessarily hurt and harm the Taliban in power, because if they did, they could easily target the Taliban leadership and then go after their command and control. So what Pakistan has been doing since 2021, when it enabled essentially the Taliban to recapture and topple Afghanistan's growing democracy. And we recall from the visit by the ISI chief to Kabul to essentially install the Taliban, as we speak about, in power. And so the Taliban remains a strategic proxy for Pakistan in search of its continued search for strategic depth. And to secure that, it has, I think, secured that through uh, the Taliban in power. But of course, there are groups, there are elements, there are other countries in the play that could influence the Taliban, could have influenced the Taliban. That's also very much questionable, against which Pakistan on and off takes action. And that, unfortunately, as we stated in our statement of concern, as well as that by UNAMA, the UN Assistance Mission to Afghanistan, and then even the Norwegian Refugee Council, that often, unfortunately, kills and maims innocent civilians. We're talking about scores of Afghans that have died in these blind strikes, which the Pakistani army claims to have struck terrorists, but of course, terrorists are sitting in Kabul, in Kandahar, and so many other places that are effectively sheltering not just one, but dozens of other terrorist groups. But the Pakistani response has been selective, essentially allowing the umbrella, which itself invented and created and supported for decades, so to speak, to continue operating while selectively perhaps targeting those terrorist networks, you call them, or they call them, that they see as a threat to Pakistan, but not effectively addressing the matter of the problem. In this case, the umbrella, which is Pakistan's proxy, in which it created back in the 1990s, the story of which the world knows, the United Nations knows, Afghanistan's neighbors knows, and Pakistani leadership, even just in the recent months, has acknowledged, including the defense minister of Pakistan is on record acknowledging that they actually did exactly do what I'm saying, and that the blow back effect is there, which he said that they are addressing and are reacting to.
Ambassador, let's turn to the internal security environment in Afghanistan. So many people have written that world has essentially ignored the emerging threat of militancy from Afghanistan under the Taliban regime. I want to ask this in two parts. How bad do you think is the militant threat to the region or globally? And is the world paying attention, the way it should be?
Unfortunately not. Again, back to the US, that it has neglected this growing threat under the Taliban from this administration, and including warning from many credible military voices, including those who served in Afghanistan, and of course at very higher ranks, 3-star, 4-star generals, and of course the region foremost, because at the end of the day, the Trump administration would say, and have already declared, that that region is no longer their priority, that they might be pursuing a strategy based on defensive realism as opposed to offensive realism, which the U.S. is pursuing here in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's up to the region, in this case, Afghanistan's neighbors, all of which, most of them at least, are in the ACO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is primarily concerned about threats that emanate essentially from Afghanistan, terrorism, extremism, drugs, and also support for separatism when it comes to the Chinese interests, because the Taliban are also sheltering ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, whose primary target is China. And so the threat has grown. I'll just give you one example. 5 years on, since 2021, the Taliban have opened thousands of madrasas. And these madrasas are not your traditional madrasas operating in countries where actually, students that attend and ultimately graduate as clerics, trained clerics, aware of the true teachings, tenets, and foundations of Islam, which they then, of course, teach and educate, the populace on. But in this case, these are radicalization factories, very much modeled after those madrasas, which many of the Taliban leadership and rank and file attended in Pakistan. So basically, these madrasas produce and graduate extremists and would be suicide terrorists who would, of course, foremost victimize the Afghan people and then would be sent on missions to Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asia and further afield. And it has already happened, as we know, given the frequent attacks on Pakistani territory, targets of choice to militants operating under this umbrella, and Iran, and even, of course, Central Asia and all the way Moscow. If you recall, I think 1 or 2 years ago, to be specific, I can't remember that some of those ISIS elements who were arrested in Moscow associated with the attack there were actually trained in Afghanistan. And so, but unfortunately, the region has neglected this situation, opting to pursue a pragmatic policy, which means engaging with the Taliban to just, carry out day-to-day issues, to maintain, security relations when it comes to their core national security objectives, but effectively and collectively ignoring and neglecting what has, evolved over the past 5 years, a situation which I call, a multitude of crises, from political, because of course this government is not legitimate, it's not inclusive, and it lacks international recognition, to security, which we have been discussing, the presence of over 20 terrorist networks, foremost victimizing the Afghan people, the collapse of the Afghan economy, which means, of course, dire poverty because there are no jobs. People talk about, 10% unemployment rate in some countries, and everyone, frowns and worries about that. But in case of Afghanistan, the unemployment rate is probably 100%. Just, minus this informal economy, and people do what they can to survive. There is effectively no economy because Afghanistan is completely isolated and shut and sanctioned. And then, which then gives us the next crisis, and the expanding crisis of a humanitarian complexity and situation, where, a growing number of Afghans, now over 20 million, are in need of basic humanitarian aid. And of course, over 3 million children are suffering, and so many of them are actually facing malnutrition, and in other cases, starvation, on which there isn't much information, simply because the, free press that Afghanistan used to enjoy has been completely silenced. And then ultimately you have a gender apartheid, which feeds all of what the crisis that I just mentioned, because when in any society, more than half of its population are completely imprisoned. That is a direct, especially women, because the role of woman in any family, in any community, in any societies, even much deeper than that of a man, because a woman is not a woman on herself as an individual and as a leader, but also she bears children, she trains children, raises children, and youth, and in charge of a whole family. So when a woman is in prison, that means the whole family is dysfunctioning. And a family in a situation of deep humanitarian crisis, poverty, and insecurity. And then in that, light where, the children and especially youth are sent to these radicalization factories. Now imagine that from now to 5 to 10 years from now, the kind of danger and threat that would develop on the you know doorsteps of countries like Russia, China, and of course India and Pakistan. As much as, of course, they're all dealing with the situation very pragmatically, but the very negligence of the threats that are brewing and growing is, I think, very much detrimental to the core national security goals. And that's why we, the Afghan people, have a blueprint for the region to really come together, foremost based on their own national security interests. And that's why we have repeatedly called on Pakistan, especially now that, Pakistan's star has risen so much in light of it is effective mediation between US and Iran. If it can do that, then why not help stabilize the situation just next door? Why not help bring all Afghan sides together, foremost under the umbrella of SCO, and then bring the United Nations and the US, especially the US Board of Peace, on board to help stabilize Afghanistan through formation of an inclusive government, which does include the Taliban. We Afghans are very realistic. The Taliban are reality. They're there. And we learned also from Bonn agreement that when the Bonn agreement was adopted, the Taliban were excluded. And that exclusion of the Taliban basically, again, gave Pakistan an opportunity to support the Taliban as an insurgency. Had the Taliban been, included in the Bonn process and given a share and power, then perhaps we would not have had the Taliban today. So, but to learn from that lesson, Pakistan and the rest of the member states of SCO could, as neighbors of Afghanistan, collectively pursue what I call, and I've written an article on this, a regional compact for stabilization of Afghanistan. And if they do that and then disengage with the Taliban pragmatically and incentivize and even disincentivize collectively the Taliban to come to the negotiating table and reach with other Afghan side a sustainable political settlement, one that would also include the Taliban, and then move forward with the removal of sanctions, with, of course, reconstruction and sustainable development of Afghanistan, so that Afghanistan not only internally stabilizes, but also externally, maintains non-interference, which, of course, the compact would guarantee and would also enforce. And enforcement would also be collective by the neighbors of Afghanistan, so that everyone basically collaborates with Afghanistan and enjoys from what Afghanistan offers in terms of connectivity, and as well as, of course, sharing water. When I talk about connectivity, it is trade, it is energy trade, and when I talk about environment, I mean Afghanistan is a riparian country, one that gives water to Pakistan and Iran, and one as well as to Central Asia. And so all of these things and incentives could be worked in that compact such that the neighbors basically commit to non-interference in return for connectivity and environmental benefits. And if that happens, and I think the region is in a perfect position and with the influence, combined influence to help stabilize their own neighborhood and not to basically maintain their own neighborhood as a permanent island of instability, festering with all sorts of threats that would continue to basically threaten these individual countries' security as well as regional security and stability, which these countries actually need for expanding regional trade and economic cooperation. So that's why it is in the best long-term interests of the region, and foremost, of course, Pakistan, and as well as Iran, because these are the two countries which have unfortunately in the past and as we speak continue to interfere. But if they do what I just recommended, and then I think it would foremost help them. Iran's Sistan province, for example, entirely depends and is surviving because of the water coming from Afghanistan. So the environmental benefits that I'm talking about are just not, an optional issue. It's a core national security both for Pakistan and Iran, because of course they need water and they need energy through Afghanistan, and they do need, of course, looking at the fragility of economy in Pakistan and the economic challenges facing it now. Pakistan does need to, trade and invest and find ways to help really grow its economy on a sustainable basis. Yes, it gets aid from the Gulf or from the US and all sorts of these, rentier type of aid, transactional aid, but that's not what the people of Pakistan need. They need sustainable economic growth, which would happen when, of course, the peripheries or the neighborhood, so to speak, stabilizes, and that the region increasingly trade and invest and in a variety of ways and then prosper together.
Ambassador, let's hope and conclude on the note that situation stabilizes in Afghanistan. And thank you very much for sharing your valuable insights and joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.